Welcome to Mythic Slumber, your sanctuary for adult sleep stories. Tonight, we drift into ancient Egypt, where sunlight turns limestone to gold, and quiet corridors hold secrets older than memory. In the city of Amarna, a queen once walked beneath blue lotus perfume and open skies. Nefertiti, the face the world remembers and the shadow history cannot explain. Then, without warning, her name grows faint. Carvings change, titles shift, records fall silent. Was she erased, or did she step behind the curtain and rule under another name? Breathe slowly as we follow warm palace light into cooler temple shade, then down into the earth itself, towards sealed doors, painted walls, and a tomb that may still be waiting. Let the mystery soften you, and the silence guide you into rest. If you wish to return to these quiet realms, gently press subscribe and leave a like. Let it be a small promise to yourself to prioritize your rest and your dreams. The Nile is calm in the earliest hour before the day fully remembers itself. The water is dark and smooth, carrying only small ripples, gentle enough to look like breathing. A thin mist rests close to the surface, drifting in slow ribbons between the reeds, as if the river is still dreaming. You can hear soft sounds that feel far away. A distant bird call, airy and patient. The quiet dip of an oar. The faint creak of rope against wood. And above it all, the sky begins its careful transformation. Not sudden brightness, not harsh light, just a gradual warming, like a lamp being turned up slowly. First the horizon becomes pale, then it blushes with rose, then it fades into gold. This is the moment when ancient Egypt feels most alive, not loud, not busy. Alive in the way stone and water can be alive, full of history, and are full of sunlight waiting to touch it. Your boat moves forward without hurry. The reeds brush the edge of the water like fingertips. The air smells of damp earth, river plants, and the faint sweetness of blossoms carried from somewhere inland. And then, as the day grows clearer, you see it. A line of pale cliffs ahead, limestone rising in smooth, bright walls, catching the first sunlight like a mirror. The land here seems designed for brightness. Even the dust looks lighter, as if the earth itself is made to reflect. This is Amarna, a city that once appeared almost overnight in the desert, built not just for people, but for an idea. A city made for the sun. As you approach, the world opens, the river bends, and the shoreline widens. The city's edges are not crowded with tall dark towers. Instead, it feels airy, spaced out, open to the sky. Low walls, broad courtyards, and long avenues that let the light pour through as if it belongs there. In other Egyptian cities, temples can feel like caves of stone. Cool, shadowed, secretive. But Amarna is different. Amarna welcomes daylight. It is a city that seems to say, look, nothing is hidden from the sun. Even from a distance you can sense the atmosphere. A place where air moves freely, where the horizon is always present, where the sky feels close enough to touch. The boat glides toward the landing. Sand crunches softly beneath feet as you step onto the shore. The morning is cool, but the coming heat is already promised in the brightening stone. You walk slowly inland, leaving the river behind like a quiet companion. The streets of Amarna are not yet crowded. A few figures move in the distance, workers carrying baskets, near a guard standing with relaxed posture, a child trailing behind an adult like a shadow that doesn't yet know where it belongs. The city smells of limestone dust and fresh bread. You catch the faint scent of smoke from early cooking fires, and somewhere, a soft floral note, blue lotus or something like it, drifting from a garden hidden behind a wall. As you continue, the sunlight strengthens. It spreads across the ground in wide sheets, bright enough to make you squint, yet warm in a way that feels comforting rather than sharp. Then the palace district begins to appear, not with one dramatic gate, but with a gradual shift. Cleaner stone underfoot, taller walls, more careful symmetry. Columns rise like pale reeds turned to stone. Doorways feel wider. Courtyards feel calmer. You can hear the faint sound of water, small basins or fountains. Keeping the air gentle, linen curtains move softly in the breeze, making quiet fluttering sounds like wings. This is the world that Nefertiti once walked through, not as a distant legend, as a living presence. It's easy, centuries later, to imagine her as a still image, a face frozen in perfect calm, eyes painted with that unmistakable line, lips held in a poised silence. But here, in Amarna's morning light, she becomes something else, a person, a queen whose daily life was woven into sunlight and power. In the palace gardens, the air would have carried the scent of flowers warmed by the day, lotus, herbs, sweet resin burned in small offerings. The ground would have been swept smooth. The shade from trees would have been precious, carefully placed like a gift. You can imagine the quiet choreography of a royal morning. Attendants moving with practiced silence. Jewellery laid out carefully, catching light in small flashes. Cosmetic jars opened. Perfumed oils, green pigment, fine powders like ground gemstones. In a shaded chamber near an open courtyard, Nefertiti might sit for a moment before the day's ceremonies begin. Not rushed, not frantic. Calm, like someone who understands that stillness is its own form of strength. Outside, the city wakes fully. The sounds grow richer. Footsteps, murmurs, distant calls, the soft rhythm of work beginning. You can almost hear the tapping of artisans and builders, stone against stone, wood against wood, Amarna constantly shaping itself. Because this city was built with urgency, Amarna was not the slow product of centuries. It was a deliberate creation, brought into being by Pharaoh Akhenaten, one who wanted a new centre for Egypt's spiritual life, one that belonged to the Aten, the sun disk. And in that new world, Nefertiti was not merely an ornament at the edge of power. She was visible, present, part of the public image of the reign. In relief carvings, you would see her beside the king, not tucked away behind curtains. Her posture is confident. Her role is clear. She is there in the sun's gaze, receiving its rays, participating in offerings, lifting her hands in ritual gestures as if the divine attention is meant for both of them. This is one reason the mystery of her disappearance becomes so haunting later, because she was not a queen who lived quietly in the background. She was the kind of queen whose absence would echo. And yet, in this moment, we are still in the beginning, where everything feels stable enough to last forever. As you walk along a broad avenue, you can see open temple spaces ahead, structures designed to let sunlight touch the altars directly. No heavy darkness, no deep corridors swallowing sound. Instead, open courtyards, bright stone, offerings placed where the sky can see them. The religion here is like the city itself, open, airy, exposed to the sun. It feels almost peaceful, but also strange, because it removes the comforting shadows that other places use to hide uncertainty. In Amarna the light is constant, and constant light can be beautiful, but constant light can also feel like inspection, like nothing can be kept private. Still, for a time, it works. The city breathes, the palace shines, the temples hum with ritual, scribes keep records, near artists carve reliefs that look softer than older Egyptian art, more intimate, more human, more filled with moments that feel like a family being observed. And Nefertiti stands at the centre of it, the queen in a world that believes it has reinvented itself. Now, imagine the morning sun rising higher. It strikes the palace walls more directly, turning the limestone brilliant. The city looks like it is made of light. Even the dust in the air glows faintly, floating in slow spirals when someone passes. On a day like this, you can understand why the Atien, pure sunlight, felt like a god that could not be ignored. You can also understand why a queen like Nefertiti would become unforgettable. Not because she was only beautiful, but because she belonged to this light the way a statue belongs to a temple, designed, deliberate, and meant to endure. And yet, even as the city brightens, the first quiet thread of shadow is already present. Not visible in the sun, visible in the way humans behave when power is concentrated around an idea. Amarna is a city built for one truth, and any city built for one truth becomes fragile when the world shifts. If you linger near a temple wall and watch people pass, you might notice the way some speak softly, checking their words, the way certain officials carry themselves with careful restraint, the way devotion and politics are tangled together like reeds woven into a mat, because when a new world is built quickly, it always needs protection. Protection from doubt, protection from old habits, protection from the past. And the past in Egypt is never quiet for long. Still, in this moment, the dawn of Amarna, we stay with the calm surface. We let the light wash over the limestone. We breathe in the lotus sweet air. We hear the soft movements of the palace waking, and we hold one image gently in the mind, a queen walking through sunlit corridors, her steps measured, her expression calm, her presence steady, as if she believes this world will last. Because later, when her name fades from the record, when her face becomes a mystery, this is what will remain. Amarna at dawn, a city made of light, and Nefertiti, bright at the centre of it, just before she becomes a shadow. Before we turn the page to follow her into the unknown, if the light of Amarna has warmed your spirit, please gently tap the like button. Think of it as a small offering left in the sand, a quiet mark to say you are here, safe within the light, before the winds of time carry us forward. By late morning, Amarna begins to glow from the inside out. The cool edge of dawn is gone now, replaced by a gentle warmth that settles on stone and skin like a slow promise. The sun climbs higher, and the city responds as if it was built to welcome this exact moment. Light slides across limestone walls and bounces into courtyards. It spills into open doorways. It brightens the pale dust that drifts in the air, turning each tiny grain into a floating spark. In other places, a strong sun would drive people into shadow. But Amarna is a city that was shaped for sunlight, and so the people move through it with an unusual rhythm, half ritual, half daily life, guided by brightness as much as by roads. If you follow the quieter pathways near the palace district, you begin to notice a softness beneath the stone. Gardens, not wild gardens. Not tangled, but careful ones, placed like calm oases inside a city of heat and light. You pass low walls and stepped thresholds, and suddenly the air changes. It becomes cooler, moister. It carries the scent of water and flowers, a scent so gentle it feels like it belongs to another world. Blue lotus. That soft, dreamy fragrance, sweet but not heavy, clean but not sharp, rises from pools and basins where lotus blossoms rest like floating stars. Their petals open toward the sun, and their colour holds something calm and rare against the pale stone. Water moves here in quiet ways, not as a river, but as small controlled streams, channels that glide through the garden, feeding basins, soothing the air. You can hear it if you stand still, the faint trickle, the small splash, the delicate sound of a world being kept alive on purpose. This garden is not a luxury alone, it is a message. In a desert, water is power. In a royal city, the ability to create shade and fragrance and coolness is not just comfort, it is authority made visible. And this is where Nefertiti's world becomes clearer. Because a queen is not only a person, a queen is an atmosphere. She's a shape of life that others imitate, a way of moving, a way of speaking, a way of turning ordinary space into something sacred. You can imagine her here, not rushing, not anxious, moving through the garden with the calm certainty of someone who belongs to every corner of the palace. The rustle of linen, the soft clink of jewellery, the gentle sound of sandals against stone. Attendants follow at a respectful distance, carrying small items, a fan made of feathers, a tray with a cup, a folded cloth, or perhaps a small container of perfumed oil. No one speaks loudly in this space, not because they are afraid, because this kind of calm is fragile and everyone knows it. If you sit in the shade for a moment and let the garden surround you, you begin to understand why Nefertiti became a symbol. Not simply a symbol of beauty, a symbol of order. In a kingdom that depends on cycles, flood and harvest, heat and cool, day and night, order is the highest comfort. And in Amarna, order is tied to the sun, the Aten. Not a god hidden in darkness behind thick temple walls, but a god seen openly, shining on everything without secrecy. This changes the feeling of worship, because in most temples worship happens in shadow, where candles and incense create mystery. In Amarna, worship happens in light, as if the divine is not distant, not hidden, not locked away, but present, filling courtyards and touching offerings directly. If you walk from the palace gardens toward the temple spaces, you notice the architecture shift into something even more open. Altars sit under the sky, courtyards stretch wide, columns frame sunlight rather than blocking it. The walls feel less like barriers and more like boundaries guiding attention. And the people here move with a particular kind of reverence. They face the sun. They lift their hands. They bow, not to a shadowed statue, but to brightness itself. In the centre of this ritual world stands the royal family, the king and the queen, side by side. Not separated the way some older traditions might have kept a royal woman more hidden. Nefertiti is visible. Her presence is part of the performance, part of the sacred order of the day. You can picture the scene easily. The sun is high, casting clean shadows. A line of priests holds offerings, bread, fruit, incense, flowers, arranged carefully on trays. The air shimmers with heat, but the ritual continues steadily, calm and exact. Akhenaten stands with his distinctive silhouette, and beside him is Nefertiti, poised and composed, her posture straight, her movements controlled. She lifts her hands, she gives an offering, she participates, and in that moment the city sees her not as decoration, but as power. In Amarna, the queen is not simply royal, she is part of the religion, she helps embody it, and that makes her position both magnificent and dangerous. Because when politics and faith become intertwined, the people at the centre become targets for every shift in belief. Still, in this moment, we remain inside the calm. We stay with the sensory rhythm of her world, the scent of lotus and warm stone, the glare of sunlight on pale walls, the soft shadows cast by columns, the sound of water returning in small, controlled streams. If you walk along a temple courtyard, you might hear the quiet murmur of hymns, voices low and steady, repeating phrases like waves repeating the shore. The Aten is praised not with mystery, but with clarity, not with dark secrets, but with glowing certainty. This certainty shapes the whole city. It shapes art too. The carvings of Amarna are softer than older Egyptian reliefs. Faces look more intimate. Bodies lean toward each other in family scenes. Hands touch. Children appear more often, held close, lifted toward the sun like offerings themselves. And at the centre of those scenes, Nefertiti appears again and again, sometimes tall and regal, sometimes in family tenderness, sometimes as a nearly equal figure beside the king. This is not typical. And because it is not typical, it feels like a clue. Because when history becomes strange, it often means something important is happening under the surface. If you drift back toward the palace in the late afternoon, the light begins to change. It softens. It becomes honey-coloured, less intense. The limestone walls no longer glare. They glow. The garden air grows cooler again, and the lotus scent deepens slightly, as if the flowers are saving their sweetness for the quieter hours. This is the time of day when the palace feels most peaceful. The heat eases, the shadows lengthen, the city slows, and here, in this gentle slowing, you can imagine Nefertiti in private. One not the queen carved into stone, not the symbol in public ceremonies. A woman in her own chambers, perhaps removing heavy jewellery, perhaps drinking cool water, perhaps listening to the faint sounds of the palace settling. A queen surrounded by beauty, yes, but also surrounded by expectation. Because to be Nefertiti in Amarna is to live inside a new experiment, a new god, a new city, a new style of rule, and experiments require constant maintenance. They require loyalty. They require control of narrative. They require people to believe. If you were to stand outside a quiet hallway, you might hear whispers, not dramatic ones, not the kind that turn into shouting, but careful murmurs exchanged between officials. Foreign letters arriving, questions of succession, old temples elsewhere in Egypt still holding their influence like deep roots. Yes, priests who do not love this new sunlight religion. Nobles who quietly wonder what happens after Akhenaten. Amarna is bright, but brightness can reveal cracks, and when cracks appear, the people at the centre of the light feel the pressure first. Nefertiti, visible and central, would feel every shift like a change in wind. She would know which faces are loyal, which eyes avoid hers, which voices become softer when she enters a room. Power is often sensed more than spoken, and a queen like Nefertiti, calm, intelligent, practiced, would sense it immediately. Still, the city continues its rituals. The temple courtyards still fill with offerings. The sun still rises. The lotus still blooms. The palace still breathes. And Nefertiti remains for now a figure of perfect alignment, the queen of the sun, living in a city designed to be seen. But there is a quiet truth hidden inside all this openness. When everything is exposed to light, the shadow becomes more meaningful, because a shadow is not only darkness, a shadow is evidence of something standing in front of the sun, and soon, though not yet, Nefertiti's shadow will stretch longer than anyone expects. Soon the records will shift, soon the carvings will change, soon her name will become quieter, as if the city, so confident in sunlight suddenly begins to hide something. As the story turns, we will step into that moment, not with noise, not with dramatic collapse, but with the slow, eerie sensation of absence. We will enter the workshop where her face becomes eternal in sculpture, and we will feel the strange contrast, a queen made unforgettable, in a world that is already beginning to forget her. Before the sun sets fully on this city of light, I invite you to subscribe to Mythic Slumber. Bind yourself to our stories, so that even when the shadows grow long, you will always know where to find your sanctuary. The workshop sits a little apart from the palace's brightest courtyards, not hidden, but quieter, like a room where the city lowers its voice. Outside, Amarna still shines, sunlight still slides over limestone, the day still smells of warm stone and dust. But when you step through the workshop doorway, the air changes. It cools slightly, as if the thick walls are holding back the heat on purpose. Light enters in careful angles, soft beams through high openings, enough to see detail, not enough to glare. The sound of the city fades until it becomes a distant hum, like a memory you can't quite place. Here, the world feels focused. The floor is scattered with fine dust, chalky, pale, almost luminous. A few wooden stands line the walls. On low tables sit bowls of pigment, smooth stones for grinding, small jars of oil, and scraps of linen used to wipe hands clean. The scent is distinct: dry plaster, warm wood, mineral stone, a faint sweetness of resin, perhaps from a small lamp used when shadows deepen. In the centre of the room, a craftsman works with the calm patience of someone who knows that precision is a form of prayer. His hands move slowly, not from hesitation, but from respect. Because the work here is not ordinary decoration. It is royal image-making, an art that does more than represent a face. It creates authority. In ancient Egypt, a royal likeness is not just how someone looks. It is how power is understood. It is how the kingdom learns what to believe. A statue does not only show a queen, it tells the world what a queen is. And in Amarna, where everything is newly designed, new city, new religious focus, this new style of art, the making of a royal image carries even more weight. The artist's tools are simple: a chisel, a small blade, a smoothing stone, a brush for pigment. Yet what he builds is something that will outlast brick walls and royal speeches. He builds a face that will survive even when names fade. On a stand near the centre, the form begins, not finished yet, not fully alive, but already unmistakable in its balance. A long neck, poised and elegant, rising like a reed from still water. A jawline shaped with quiet confidence, cheekbones that catch light softly, lips held in calm restraint, neither smiling nor cold, but controlled. The eyes are the most haunting part. Because even before colour is added, even before the final details are refined, the eyes seem to suggest attention, not emotion, awareness. A presence that looks outward without needing to move. The artist sits close, leaning in, squinting slightly in the angled light. He is listening with his hands, feeling the surface the way someone might feel the grain of wood or the edge of a leaf. He brushes away dust with a gentle motion and studies the shape again. Then he makes a tiny adjustment, a slight curve, a delicate reduction. A barely visible change that makes the whole expression more precise. This is how masterpieces are made, not by grand gestures, by quiet corrections, by the willingness to repeat the same careful act until the work feels inevitable. Around him, apprentices move softly. One grinds pigment, pressing stone against stone in a slow circular rhythm. The sound is soothing, like distant waves, like time turning. Another warms a little wax or mixes a binder, ice stirring patiently. A third carries a small tablet or note, recording what materials were used, what is needed next, what tasks remain. Even here, in a room of art, the civilization's habit remains: measure, record, repeat. Outside, the sun continues its steady climb and fall. But inside, time behaves differently. Time slows, time becomes detail, and the object on the stand begins to feel less like a sculpture and more like a promise that Nefertiti's presence will be made permanent, not because she fears death, because the kingdom needs her image. Amarna is built on visibility, on light, on the idea that the Aten's rays touch everything, and Nefertiti, in this world, is part of that radiance. She's not meant to vanish. She's meant to stand beside the king, beside the sun, and remain in the eyes of the people. Which is why the later mystery becomes so unsettling. Because how does a figure crafted to be unforgettable become a shadow? In this workshop you can almost feel the contradiction forming, like a faint line in the clay of history. The artist lifts his gaze for a moment, as if imagining the queen in front of him. He has likely seen her, at least from a distance. He has watched her walk through palace corridors with that calm, practiced motion. He has seen the way attendants shift when she enters a room, the way officials straighten their backs, the way the light catches the edge of her crown. He knows the queen is not only beauty, he knows she is discipline, a controlled stillness that can hold a room without speaking. So he does not carve softness into the face, he carves steadiness. This slight lift of the chin that says, "I am not uncertain." The smooth line of the mouth that says, "I will not reveal what I am thinking." This serene gaze that says, "I see more than you know." In a place like Egypt, where the world is held together by ritual and hierarchy, that kind of expression is a language. It tells the people the centre is stable, even if the edges tremble. Soon the artist begins to add colour, a thin layer of pigment smoothed carefully, blended with oil or binder. The tone is warm and human, not a flat mask, but a surface that catches light like skin. Then the iconic line appears around the eyes, dark, precise, elegant. Not heavy, not harsh. A contour that frames the gaze and makes it feel sharper, more aware. The brows are shaped with intention. The lips receive a hint of colour, subtle, controlled. Every addition is small, deliberate. Nothing is rushed. Because a royal image is not allowed to look like a guess, it must look like certainty. And as the day moves on, the workshop becomes its own little universe of calm. Pigment grinding continues, circle after circle steady as breath. Dust rises and settles. Tools clink softly and then go quiet again. The angled light shifts across the bust, making the cheekbones glow, then letting the shadow under the jaw deepen, then softening again. The face seems to change without changing. And that is the strange power of great portraiture. It feels alive, even when it is still. At some point, someone brings water, a small cup. The artist drinks slowly, barely looking away from his work. He knows what this is, not a sculpture, a political reality carved into form, a queen made into an ideal. And ideals are meant to endure. In the palace beyond the workshop walls, the day's rituals continue. Offerings are made, hymns are sung, courtiers move carefully around each other like pieces on a board. But inside this room, the artist is doing something even more enduring. He's capturing a moment in time before it changes, before uncertainty arrives, before names vanish. before the city that seems made of light begins to dim at the edges, because whether he knows it or not, the bust will become a kind of anchor. Long after Amarna's courtyards fall silent, long after the Aten's temples are abandoned, long after the palace curtains rot into dust, this face will remain. It will travel far beyond the Nile, far beyond the desert, far beyond the language of the scribes. It will become the symbol of a queen who feels close enough to touch, yet remains impossibly distant. A queen remembered for her presence, and haunted for her absence. That is the quiet magic of this workshop. It creates a paradox, a face that survives, a name that fades, a woman who becomes two things at once, a beauty frozen in time, and a mystery that deepens with every century. As the artist makes his final smoothing pass for the day, he sets down his tool and leans back slightly. The room is quiet. The bust stands in stillness, catching the last warm angle of light, and for a moment it feels like Nefertiti is here, calm, composed, watching, not speaking, not explaining, just present, a presence that refuses to be simplified. And so we linger here in the stillness, all poised on the edge of the moment when history's light begins to shift. Ideally, the records will soon grow strange, the inscriptions will change, and the world that seemed so open to the sun will start to close around one question. How does a queen disappear while her face becomes eternal? There is a certain kind of mystery that does not arrive like a storm. It arrives like dust, so slowly you don't notice it at first. A thin layer settling over what you thought you knew, changing the shape of things without making a sound. In Amarna, the sun still rises the same way. The limestone still catches gold. The lotus still blooms in the palace pools. The temple courtyards still fill with bright air. And yet, something begins to shift, not in the sky, in the records, in the careful marks pressed into clay and carved into stone, the places where Egypt tried to make life permanent. It begins in what is missing, a name that was once everywhere, a title that once stood beside the kings like a steady pillar. Nefertiti. In earlier years, her presence feels impossible to avoid. She stands in reliefs, offering to the Aten. She appears in ceremonial scenes. She moves through the story of the reign like a bright thread woven into every panel of carved stone. But then, around the 12th year of Akhenaten's reign, something happens that feels like a candle being covered by a hand. A quiet dimming. Her name becomes less frequent. Her titles stop appearing where they used to. And to the people living through it, it might have felt ordinary at first. Just a change of focus, a shift in ceremony, a new name rising in importance as courts always reshuffle. But for history, the silence becomes loud, because in a world that recorded so much, the sudden thinning of evidence is never accidental. It suggests choice, or crisis, or both. To understand how unsettling this is, imagine a temple courtyard in the bright middle of the day. The Aten's light pours down from a wide-open sky. The stone underfoot is warm. The air shimmers slightly in the heat. Priests move carefully, lifting offerings, bread, fruit, incense, toward the sun disk as if feeding it with devotion. On the walls, carved scenes show the royal family receiving the Aten's rays. The rays end in tiny hands, offering life symbols and blessings. The king stands in his familiar pose. Children appear in lively gestures, caught mid-motion in stone. And for a moment, everything seems steady. Then you notice it. A section where the carving feels altered. Not broken dramatically, not smashed. Simply adjusted. A name recut. A line smoothed. A space where a title once belonged. The stone doesn't shout, but it hints. and hints are sometimes more unsettling than certainty, because certainty can be faced. A hint can grow. In the palace, the rhythm begins to change too. It's subtle at first. Fewer public moments where the queen stands beside the king. Fewer reliefs being commissioned in her image. Fewer mentions in the official language of the court, and in a city like Amarna, where visibility is power, less visibility is not a small detail, it is a signal. The corridors remain cool and fragrant. Linen curtains still flutter. Attendants still move like quiet shadows. Yet there is a new carefulness in the air, as if conversations have learned to lower themselves. When an official speaks, he chooses his words more slowly. When a scribe writes, he pauses before certain titles. When names are spoken, some voices soften, as if the sound might travel through stone, because everyone knows what happens when a royal narrative changes. It does not only change art, it changes safety. In a world where the king's truth is the kingdom's truth, being associated with the wrong name can become dangerous overnight. So people watch, they listen, they read the smallest changes like sailors reading the river. And in that watching, rumours begin to form, not loud rumours, not marketplace shouting, but quiet suggestions shared behind curtains and under the shade of colonnades. Some say Nefertiti fell ill, a simple explanation, gentle enough to soothe the mind. Others say she was pushed aside by politics, that the court shifted, that alliances hardened, that certain families gained ground while others lost it. Others whisper something more strange, that Nefertiti did not disappear, that she transformed, that she stepped into a role with a different name, a different face of power. In Egypt, names are not just labels, names are identity, names are destiny. To take a new name is to become new. And the ancient world understood this with a seriousness modern life rarely carries. So when a new name begins to appear in the record, Neferneferuaten and other fragments of royal titles, the mind cannot help but connect the dots. Was this a new ruler, a co-regent, a hidden hand guiding Egypt through a fragile moment? Or could it be her? Could the queen who once stood in sunlight have moved into the shadows by choice, not as a victim, but as a strategist? Because there is another truth about Amarna that grows clearer as time passes. This city was never only a dream, it was also a gamble. Akhenaten's religious shift was bold, and boldness always creates resistance. Old priesthoods do not quietly surrender power. Ancient traditions do not vanish just because a new city is built. The past in Egypt is strong, like deep roots gripping the soil. So imagine the pressure building behind the palace walls, foreign letters arriving asking for aid, border tensions and political demands, officials negotiating loyalties, priests elsewhere waiting for the moment the Aten's light weakens, ready to return the old gods to their temples. In such a moment, the royal family does not only need beauty, it needs stability. It needs control. It needs someone who can hold the centre while the edges shake. And Nefertiti, as the visible partner of the reign, would have been positioned right at that centre, which means she would also have been the first person history would try to rewrite if the narrative needed rewriting. This is why the Amarna mystery feels so haunting, because it is not simply that she disappears, it is the way she disappears, through paperwork, through carved titles, through quiet substitutions, through the delicate art of erasure. Erasure is not always violent. Sometimes it is administrative. Sometimes it is a scribe being told to omit a name. Sometimes it is a sculptor receiving a revised order. Sometimes it is a wall relief being carefully reworked so the change looks seamless in the bright sun. And because Amarna is a city of light, the erasure has to be precise. Light reveals mistakes, so the court's silence becomes careful, practiced, almost elegant, a shadow drawn with a steady hand. Now imagine a small room in the palace at night. The air is cooler. The day's heat has retreated into stone. Oil lamps glow in shallow bowls, in casting a warm trembling light that makes the walls look like they are moving gently. A scribe sits with a tablet. His stylus hovers. Across from him, an official speaks softly. "Write the king's name." The scribe nods. "Write the Aten." He nods again. Then comes the pause. A longer pause, the kind of pause that carries weight. "Do not write that name." The scribe's hand stills. He looks down at the clay. He doesn't ask why. In a palace, why is not always safe. He simply adjusts. The stylus presses into the tablet. Tap, tap. A new arrangement. A new official phrasing. A new reality. And the next day the sun rises again, bright and unquestioning, washing the city clean with light as if nothing happened. But something did happen. Something that cannot be undone. Because once a name begins to vanish from official memory, it is like pulling a thread from a tapestry. The whole image may hold for a while, but the tension changes, and here is where the listener's mind can rest in the mystery without needing to solve it. Because the goal is not to prove one theory. The goal is to feel the atmosphere of a turning point, to feel the moment when certainty becomes fragile, to feel the way a city made of light begins to create shadows. In the temples, the rituals continue, but the energy shifts. In the palace, the gardens still bloom, but the conversations shorten. In the workshop, the face of Nefertiti remains serene in painted perfection, outlasting the very hands that made it. And outside the city walls, the desert waits, endless, silent, indifferent. History does not hurry, but it does not stop. Year 12 becomes a doorway, a threshold between presence and absence, between the queen the city displayed proudly and the queen who becomes a question. Was she erased because she fell from favour? Was she hidden because she rose higher than anyone expected? Was she renamed, recrowned, transformed into a ruler who governed in silence? Or did she simply step away into private life, leaving the sunlit stage behind? The records do not answer clearly. They only whisper, and that whisper is enough to change how you see everything that came before. Because once you notice the absence, you cannot return to the old certainty. Nefertiti is no longer only a face. She becomes a shadow on the wall of history. Proof that even in a civilization obsessed with permanence, a person can slip away. And now, as the night deepens in your mind, you can let that mystery feel gentle rather than sharp. A quiet question, a soft fog, a name fading like the last warmth of day. Soon we will walk through the palace after the music, through hallways that feel emptier, through whispers that grow more careful, through a court that senses something ending. Because shadows do not appear without a change in light, and in Amarna, the light is beginning to change. The palace in Amarna is most beautiful when the day begins to soften, when the harshness of noon has passed and the sunlight turns honey-coloured, sliding across columns and courtyards with a gentler touch. In those hours the limestone does not glare, it glows. The air grows calmer too. The breeze returns. Linen curtains move like slow waves. In the gardens the lotus pools hold their coolness, and the fragrance deepens, sweet, quiet, slightly dreamlike. This is the time of day when the palace feels like a living thing settling its breath. And yet, beneath that calm, the atmosphere has changed. Not in a way you can point to immediately, not in a way a visitor would notice on a first walk. But if you have been here long enough, if you have felt the earlier years when the palace moved with confidence, then you can sense it now like a faint tension in a rope. The music still exists, there are still singers, still harp strings plucked gently in shaded rooms, still soft percussion during ceremonies, still laughter in some courtyards, especially where children run and play. But the music no longer feels like the centre. It feels like an effort, a way of holding brightness in place, a way of pretending the light has not begun to tilt. You walk through a long corridor lined with pale columns. The shadows between them stretch farther than they used to. The stone underfoot is cool where sunlight does not reach. Your footsteps make a quiet sound, soft taps, like distant raindrops. Somewhere nearby you hear murmuring voices, not loud, not dramatic, careful voices, the kind that pause when someone approaches, the kind that smooth their edges as if words themselves can be dangerous. In the palace, people do not gossip the way markets gossip. Palace whispers are different. They are controlled, measured, and they often carry real weight, because the palace is where reality is decided. A scribe might whisper about a changed title, a steward might whisper about new orders, a priest might whisper about tension outside the city. Letters arriving from foreign rulers, requests for gold, requests for soldiers, complaints, threats wrapped in polite language. And among these whispers, Nefertiti's absence becomes a presence of its own. It hangs in doorways. It lingers in pauses. It shows itself in what is not said. Because if a queen was once central and now is not, everyone notices. Not everyone speaks, but everyone notices. In a courtyard near the gardens, an attendant pours water into a basin. The water catches the fading light and looks briefly like liquid gold. Another attendant rearranges a bowl of flowers, carefully, as if beauty can hold the world together. Two officials pass by, their voices low. You catch a fragment. The old temples, the priests in Thebes, not everyone accepts. Succession. Then the voices fade around a corner, leaving only the sound of water and the soft rustle of leaves. Succession. The word feels heavy in Egypt, because Egypt is not simply a kingdom. Egypt is an idea of continuity, a belief that order must be maintained so the sun continues rising, the Nile continues flooding, and the world does not slide back into chaos. When succession is uncertain, the entire cosmos feels uneasy, and in Amarna uncertainty is sharper, because Amarna itself is new. It does not have deep roots the way older royal centres do. It is built on one man's vision, one man's faith, one city's bright experiment. So if anything happens to the centre of that experiment, the structure trembles. This is where rivalries begin to sharpen, not with swords, with proximity, with access, with who stands closest during ceremonies, with who signs documents, with whose name appears on new stone carvings, with who is seen. Visibility is currency here, and when Nefertiti fades from view, the space she leaves behind is not empty for long. Other names begin to drift closer to the light. Other faces appear more often in reliefs. Other figures step forward in the palace's quiet choreography. And the palace responds the way a body responds when balance shifts. People adjust. They choose sides without announcing it. They become careful about where they stand, about who they greet first, about which servant they trust. because in royal courts the smallest gestures become signals. A servant who once carried a message to Nefertiti might now be assigned elsewhere. A scribe who once wrote her titles might now be instructed to omit them. A craftsman who once carved her image might now receive different commissions, and each of those small changes is like a stone being moved in a game you're not allowed to see. In the quieter parts of the palace, corridors begin to feel longer, not because they have changed, because the people walking them have changed. When a place is full of confidence, space feels alive. When a place is full of uncertainty, space feels hollow. You might pass a doorway that once led to lively gatherings, only to find it half closed now, guarded by a silent attendant whose posture says, "Not today." You might step into a courtyard that once held laughter and conversation, only to hear your own breathing and the distant sound of sandals passing somewhere else. It is not dramatic emptiness. It is the slow thinning of energy, the way a party fades after midnight, when people drift away one by one and the music becomes quieter, until only a few lamps remain. The palace after the music. That is what Amarna begins to feel like, still beautiful, still shining, but moving towards silence. And when silence grows, imagination grows too, because humans cannot tolerate unexplained absence. So the court begins to build stories, and some say Nefertiti is ill and resting in private chambers, her health guarded like a secret. Some say she's been pushed aside, replaced in favour, removed from ceremonial roles. Some say she has gone to another city, perhaps to manage something important, far from the bright stage of Amarna. And some say the strangest thing of all, that she is still here, that she never left, that her absence is a disguise, that the Queen has simply stepped into a different identity, one that can move through politics more freely, one that can hold power without attracting the kind of attention that draws enemies. A shadow identity, a new name, a new face of authority. And the palace, hearing this whisper, becomes even more cautious, because if Nefertiti has become something else, then every person's position must be recalculated. Who is truly in power? Who is merely performing? Who will remain safe when the next shift comes? The palace is full of objects that show how quickly power can become fragile. Seals used to close documents, rings pressed into clay, locks on storerooms, curtains drawn across doorways. Every object is a reminder that access matters, and now access is shifting. At night the palace becomes even quieter. Oil lamps glow in shallow bowls, their flames trembling gently. The cool air moves through open courtyards. Somewhere a single musician might play softly, the notes drifting like perfume through stone corridors. In one room, scribes work late, pressing marks into clay, recording transactions and decrees and official events. Their hands are steady, but their minds are alert. Because scribes do not only write, they notice. They notice who is mentioned, who is omitted, which titles are used, which titles are avoided, which phrases change. And in that noticing they feel the shape of the truth even when it is never spoken. The truth is that Amarna is entering a fragile phase. The bright certainty of earlier years is becoming a delicate performance. A performance maintained by ritual and beauty and careful silence. A performance that insists everything is still under control. But control, in a palace, often means something very specific. It means the story is being managed. And when a story is being managed, it means someone is afraid of what the truth might do. You walk one last corridor in your mind, toward the outer edge of the palace complex where you can smell the desert again. Beyond the walls, the landscape is still, dark, wide. The stars above feel sharp and clear. You can hear the faint sound of night insects, and somewhere far away the Nile continues its steady movement. The palace behind you is full of lamps, but the darkness beyond is endless. And in that contrast, the mystery of Nefertiti deepens. A queen who once stood in full sun. A queen whose face was carved to last forever. Now becoming difficult to locate in the story of her own time. It is not only a mystery of where she went, it is a mystery of what was happening in Egypt that required her to become less visible. Because in a world that worships the sun, choosing shadow is never accidental. Soon we will follow the most intriguing possibility. Not exile, not disappearance, but transformation. We will step into the candlelit spaces where new names are spoken softly, where the double crown is heavy, where power moves behind curtains. We will enter the idea of Nefertiti as Neferneferuaten, the queen who may have ruled from the shadows and held Egypt together when the light began to change. Night in Amarna is gentler than the day. The heat loosens its grip and slips into the stone. The air becomes cool enough to feel like water on the skin. Courtyards that blazed with sunlight now rest in shadow, quiet and wide, with only the soft glow of lamps marking paths through the palace. From outside, the city looks peaceful. From inside, the palace feels alert, because when daylight fades, the visible world becomes less important, and the hidden world wakes. Oil lamps sit in shallow bowls along corridors and doorways, their flames trembling in the moving air. Each flame creates a small island of light, surrounded by darkness that feels deep and patient. The walls, painted pale, take on warm tones in lamplight. Shadows stretch longer than they should, bending around corners, turning familiar hallways into slow, mysterious passageways. In the distance you might hear quiet footsteps, not hurried, not loud, measured, as if the people walking have practiced moving without drawing attention. This is the hour when decisions can be made without an audience. The hour when a palace can become what it truly is, a place where stories are shaped. A quiet chamber sits somewhere within the palace complex, far from the open courtyards and ceremonial spaces, protected by turns and doors and the simple power of distance. The room is not large, but it is carefully arranged. A low table, a few cushions, a small stand holding a jar of water, a lamp whose flame leans slightly, casting a steady glow. On the table rests a clay tablet still damp enough to hold fresh marks. Beside it, a reed stylus waits like a delicate tool of fate. Two officials stand close to the wall. They speak softly, not because the room is unsafe, but because the words themselves are heavy. A name is being discussed, and in Egypt a name is never a small thing. To change a name is to change the way the world recognizes you. To change a name is to shift your role in the order of existence. So when a new royal name begins to appear, Neferneferuaten, the palace does not treat it as a simple replacement. It treats it like a doorway that must be entered with care. You can imagine the scribe's hand hovering above the tablet, stylus poised, waiting for confirmation, waiting for permission. Because once the marks are pressed into clay, the name becomes real. A name written is a name acknowledged, and acknowledgement is power. In the lamplight, someone speaks the words slowly, as if testing their weight. Neferneferuaten. Beautiful are the beauties of Aten. The name itself is a veil made of light. It sounds like devotion. It sounds like continuity. It sounds like it belongs to the same bright religious world that built Amarna. And that is precisely why it is useful. Because in a palace where politics is fragile, The safest disguise is one that looks familiar. If Nefertiti truly stepped into a hidden reign, she would not choose a name that shocked the court. She would choose a name that soothed it. A name that sounded like the Aten still shone safely above everything. A name that made change feel like consistency. Now imagine a deeper layer of quiet. A private corridor leading to a dressing chamber lit only by 2 lamps. The air smells of oil and warm stone and faint perfume. Resin, lotus, something subtle that lingers in fabrics. An attendant folds linen carefully on a low bench. Another checks a small chest holding jewellery and ceremonial items, lifting each piece as if it is fragile and sacred. And then, in this calm space, a figure stands very still. Not a servant, not an official. A royal presence, the kind that makes the whole room hold its breath. Nefertiti. Not in the bright crown she wears during public ceremonies, not in the full display of sunlight. Here, in lamplight, her face would look different. Softer shadows under the cheekbones. Warm light across the brow. The familiar calm expression made deeper by the intimacy of darkness. She does not need to speak loudly. She does not need to announce herself. Her authority is in her stillness. And if the theory is true, if she's about to step behind her own name, then this is the moment when the transformation happens, not with drama, with ritual. Because Egypt understands transformation through ritual. If you become something else, you do it with ceremony, with symbolism, with exactness. An attendant lifts a piece of regalia, perhaps not the full crown, but something that carries the weight of it. Another offers a collar of beads or gold. Someone places a staff nearby, resting it against the wall like a quiet warning. The objects are not merely decorative, they are signals. They tell the world, this person is not ordinary. This person is the centre, and centres must remain, even when names change. The double crown of Egypt, red and white, represents unity. Upper and Lower Egypt held together. The very idea of order becoming visible. To wear it is to accept a burden that does not sleep. Because a pharaoh is not just a ruler. A pharaoh is a role the cosmos depends on. So if Nefertiti steps into this role, she steps into something immense. She becomes the one who must keep the world steady while everything else shifts. And this is where the story becomes calming in a strange way. Because power, when approached slowly, becomes almost meditative. Not the noisy power of shouting and marching, the quiet power of responsibility, the steady, careful power of a person choosing to hold the centre when the centre is trembling. If you picture her in that lamplight, you can imagine what her mind might feel like. Not fear, exactly, not ambition in a childish sense, but something colder and clearer. The understanding that if the royal line breaks, Egypt breaks. That if Amarna collapses too quickly, the whole kingdom could fracture. That if old priesthoods surge back with anger, there could be a backlash so strong it erases not just a city, but years of lives built around it. So she becomes strategic. She becomes quiet. She becomes something the court cannot easily attack. Because if her face remains visible, she is vulnerable. But if she becomes a name, a title, a royal mask, then she can move through the palace like a shadow that cannot be seized. A shadow can't be arrested. A shadow can't be blamed the same way. A shadow can appear and vanish without leaving fingerprints. In the scribe chamber, the stylus finally presses into clay. Tap. A wedge mark. Tap. Another. The name takes shape. Neferneferuaten. It exists now. And with it, a new possibility exists too. That Nefertiti did not disappear into exile or illness. that she simply stepped into a different light. He is not the sunlight of public ceremonies, but the lamplight of hidden governance. There is a quiet dignity in this image, a queen who becomes the keeper of continuity, a ruler who leads without needing applause, a presence that holds the kingdom together while the official story remains carefully managed. Outside, the city sleeps. The temples are dark. The open courtyards that once blazed with a 10 light are now pools of shadow. But within the palace, lamps continue to burn, and behind those lamps, decisions continue. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear the sound of papyrus being unrolled, seals being pressed, clay tablets being stacked, orders being whispered. The machinery of civilization does not stop because the sun sets. It simply becomes quieter. And in that quiet, the hidden name becomes a protective layer. A way to rule without being attacked directly. A way to transition power in a fragile time. A way to keep Egypt breathing when the bright experiment of Amarna begins to strain. The calming part of this moment is not in the mystery alone. It is in the image of steadiness, a lamp flame that keeps burning, a ruler who keeps order, a name that exists to prevent chaos. And like all shadows, it is both comforting and unsettling. Comforting because it means someone is holding the center. Unsettling because it means the truth must be disguised. Now, as you breathe slowly, imagine the palace corridors again. The lamps in their bowls, the shadows on the walls, the quiet footsteps, the whisper of linen, the faint scent of lotus lingering in the air, and somewhere within it all, a queen moving calmly, no longer needing to be seen by the crowd. A queen who has become a shadow by choice. As time moves forward, we will feel the weight of that shadow. We will watch how Egypt begins to turn, how the old gods return like deep currents, how the bright city starts to empty, and how the hidden reign, if it existed, must carry the burden of an ending. Because even shadows cannot stop the world from changing. They can only guide the change, quietly, through the dark. There is a different kind of silence that follows a great change, not the peaceful silence of a garden at dawn, not the soothing silence of a temple before worship begins. This silence is cautious. It feels like a room full of people holding their breath at the same time. In Amarna, the days still unfold with their familiar rhythm. The sun still pours gold onto limestone. The open courtyards still glow. The lotus pools still cool the air in shaded corners. But the city now moves as if it is listening for something, as if even the stone walls know that the story is becoming fragile. If Nefertiti has stepped into the role of a hidden ruler, if the name Neferneferuaten truly belongs to her, then her reign is not a celebration, it is a balancing act. A hand placed carefully on a trembling table, because to rule in this moment is not to expand an empire. It is to prevent collapse, and in the ancient Egyptian mind, collapse is not merely political. Collapse is cosmic. It is the fear that the world could return to disorder, unpredictable floods, failed harvests, rival claims, temples in conflict, the sense that the gods have withdrawn their harmony. So whoever holds power now must do something very specific. Keep Ma'at, keep the balance, keep the order that makes the sun rise and the Nile return. This is not an abstract idea in Egypt. It is lived. It is built into ritual, law, agriculture, trade, everything. And when the royal house trembles, Ma'at trembles with it. The palace at night is where this burden becomes visible. Oil lamps burn low in shallow bowls. Their flames lean and flicker in the moving air. Shadows stretch along the columns and fold into corners like dark cloth. In a private chamber a small group gathers, not a grand court, not an audience, just those who must know. A senior official with tired eyes, a scribe carrying a tablet against his chest, a priest whose hands smell faintly of incense and ink, a messenger who has travelled fast and silently, dust still clinging to his sandals. They speak in low voices, and each voice sounds like it is weighed before it leaves the mouth. Foreign letters have arrived, requests from other kingdoms and allies, complaints, negotiations, subtle threats written in polite language. The world beyond Egypt has noticed something shifting, because when Egypt is strong, it moves like a steady river. When Egypt is uncertain, it ripples, and neighbours feel those ripples. Inside Egypt, the ripples are deeper. Old temples outside Amarna still hold power like roots in the soil. The priests of older gods do not disappear just because Aten temples were built in sunlight. Their influence waits in older cities, patient, enduring, like stone that has seen many dynasties pass. Some officials support the Aten's bright clarity. Others remain loyal to the older order in silence, careful not to be seen, but waiting. And among the people, belief is complicated. A new god can be praised loudly in Amarna, but in quieter households, in older towns, in villages far from the palace, people still whisper the names of familiar deities, names that feel like ancestors, names tied to family traditions, names that comfort them at night. So the ruler in the shadows, if it is Nefertiti, must govern a divided emotional landscape. A kingdom cannot be held together by force alone, it must be held together by meaning, so she must choose what to keep, what to soften, what to let return. That is the true burden of the shadow pharaoh, not simply power, the management of transition, the careful steering of a ship through a narrowing channel. During the day, the palace still performs its brightness. Ceremonies continue, though perhaps with less confidence. Offerings are made, hymns rise, the sun disk is praised. But behind the curtain of ritual, governance becomes more intense, more detailed, more urgent. In an administrative room near the palace complex, scribes sit in rows. Their styluses tap into clay in steady rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. The sound is soothing, almost like rain. But the words they press into clay are not soothing. They record grain shipments, work crews, stone deliveries, orders to move resources quietly, instructions to keep canals maintained, lists of officials reassigned, all the small mechanisms that keep civilization from wobbling. A strong ruler does not always appear in grand scenes. A strong ruler often appears in the quiet efficiency of bureaucracy, the steady movement of supplies, the predictable payment of workers, the absence of panic. And if Nefertiti is ruling behind a new name, then perhaps this is how she holds Egypt together, not with speeches, with systems, with continuity, with the insistence that the kingdom will keep functioning no matter what rumours float around the palace halls. Because rumours are dangerous. Rumours spread faster than official decrees. Rumours create fear, and fear is the quickest path to disorder. So the palace becomes a place where fear is managed. Not erased, managed. A messenger arrives one evening with news from a temple city beyond Amarna. A certain priesthood is growing louder. Older rituals are returning more openly. The messenger expects anger. But the ruler, in her lamplight calm, does not react with sudden emotion. She listens. She asks precise questions. How many are involved? Which officials support it? Which towns are most affected? What is the tone of the people? Then she decides what to do with the quiet clarity of someone trained in survival. Because this moment is not about winning an argument, it is about keeping Egypt unified. She might allow certain practices to return in controlled ways, letting people breathe without making it look like the Aten has been defeated. She might move trusted officials into key positions. She might strengthen supply lines to avoid shortages that could turn discomfort into rebellion. She might order the maintenance of roads and canals, because infrastructure calms people more effectively than ideology. This is the hidden mathematics of rule. And it is strangely calming to imagine, because it reminds us that chaos is not always inevitable. Chaos can be prevented when someone holds steady. But holding steady is exhausting. If you imagine Nefertiti in her private moments, you can picture the strain that never shows on the public face. A queen who once walked in bright courtyards, now spending long nights in meetings. A ruler whose image was carved as perfect calm, now needing to be calm for real, because everyone else is watching for cracks. There may be moments when she stands alone in a dark corridor between lamps, and, listening to the palace's faint sounds, the distant voice of a guard, the soft clink of a bowl, the flutter of curtains, feeling the weight of the crown even when she's not wearing it. Because the crown, once accepted, never fully leaves you. Even in private it is there, in the mind, in the posture, in the awareness that every decision echoes beyond the walls. Outside, the desert remains silent. The cliffs around Amarna still catch the sun. The Nile still moves. Nature continues, indifferent. And that indifference is part of the ruler's burden too. You cannot argue with the river. You cannot negotiate with drought. You cannot command the seasons. You can only prepare. So the palace doubles down on preparation. Granaries are checked, stockpiles counted, work crews organised. Because if the kingdom is politically fragile, it must be economically stable. Economic stability is a lullaby to the public. When bread is available, people remain calm. When grain is measured fairly, people endure uncertainty. When workers are paid on time, they keep building. When canals run, fields live. So the shadow pharaoh becomes, in a quiet sense, a guardian of ordinary life. That is the greatest kind of power, the power that keeps the everyday intact. And yet, even with all this careful management, the turning of history cannot be stopped forever. Amarna is a city built for one vision. If that vision fades, the city becomes vulnerable. The palace begins to feel emptier over time, not suddenly, but gradually, like a tide pulling away. Certain officials leave, certain artisans are reassigned. Supplies begin to shift toward older centres. A city that once seemed like the future begins to feel like a beautiful pause. A bright dream held for a moment, then released. If Nefertiti truly ruled in the shadows, then her final challenge may have been to oversee that release without letting it become a rupture. To let Egypt turn back toward older traditions without tearing itself apart. To let Amarna fade without turning into a war. To ensure the royal line continues without chaos. This is the kind of leadership that history rarely celebrates, because it is subtle. But subtle leadership can save a civilization. And in the hush of this quiet reflection, it becomes almost comforting to imagine Nefertiti as that kind of figure. Not simply a beauty, not simply a mystery, but a steady hand at the centre of a turning world. As the shadows lengthen, we will follow that turning. We will feel Amarna's light begin to dim, not as tragedy, but as a natural shift like sunset. We will move with the slow relocation of power, the quiet return toward older sacred places, and the sense that the Queen's shadow is lengthening. as the city that made her famous begins to disappear into history. Amarna was built for the sun, and for a while it truly seemed as if the sun belonged to it. The city's pale stone caught light like water catches sky. The open courtyards welcomed brightness without fear. The temples were arranged so the Aten's rays could fall directly onto altars, as if divine attention could be measured in warm gold. But even the brightest day eventually changes. Not suddenly, not with an alarm, with the slow tilt of light that happens every afternoon, when shadows lengthen and the world begins to cool. This moment is that tilt, the great turning, the moment when a city that felt like a beginning starts to behave like an ending. It begins with movement, small movements at first, easy to miss, a few wagons leaving earlier than usual, a workshop closing and not reopening, an official's household packing more carefully, more quietly, a scribe copying records with greater urgency, as if preparing for distance. Nothing is announced publicly. Publicly, the city still performs its rituals, but privately, the palace starts to feel like a place preparing to exhale. Because Amarna is not just a city, it is a statement. And when statements lose power, the most practical thing a kingdom can do is shift away from them before they become liabilities. In the palace district, lamps still glow at night, but fewer voices fill the corridors. Some rooms remain unused. Certain courtyards that once held gatherings now sit in silence, filled only with the soft sound of wind moving through columns. The gardens still bloom, but they feel lonelier. The lotus pools still hold their coolness, but fewer sandals cross the stone paths beside them. Wee water still trickles through small channels, but the sound feels clearer now, because there is less human noise to blend with it. If you walk through the palace in this phase, you can feel that the building is still beautiful. Yet beauty alone does not keep a city alive. A city stays alive when people believe it is the center, when people choose to remain, when resources flow toward it like blood. And in Amarna the flow is beginning to change direction. At dawn you might see small lines of workers moving towards storehouses, not with excitement, but with focus. Crates are stacked, jars are sealed, tools are packed, tablets are bundled carefully, wrapped in cloth, tied with cord. Records matter most in a transition, because records are how continuity survives movement. A civilization can shift location, shift temples, or shift rulers, but if the paperwork is preserved, the skeleton of the kingdom remains intact. So the scribes become even more important. They work in quiet rooms where the air smells of clay and oil, pressing mark after mark into tablets like footprints left behind for the future. Tap, 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 a steady rhythm of continuity. In this turning phase, the sound of a stylus is almost soothing, because it means the system still functions, even if the city's spirit is changing. If Nefertiti truly ruled in shadow during this time, or influenced decisions from behind the curtain, then this is where her leadership would feel most present. Not in public spectacle, in logistics, in the careful planning of departure without collapse. Because leaving a city is dangerous. When people believe a place is being abandoned, fear can spread. If fear creates chaos, chaos creates violence. So the shift must be managed like a slow sunset, not a sudden storm. The palace might issue calm orders, reassign workers, move supplies for maintenance, send officials on temporary missions, everything framed as normal. Because the goal is not to create panic. The goal is to guide movement gently enough that people barely notice the world is changing until the change is already complete. This is the kind of quiet control Egypt was capable of. Not always kind, but skilled. And as the weeks and months pass, you begin to notice that Amarna's bright experiment is thinning. The Aten's courtyard still receives sunlight, but fewer offerings appear. Hymns still rise, but the voices sound smaller. The rituals become a habit rather than a burning devotion. And far beyond Amarna, the older sacred places begin to pull attention back like gravity. Thebes, Karnak, temples older than memory. Places where priests have waited patiently, knowing that new religions can flare up like torches and then fade when the wind changes. Amarna is young. It does not have the weight of centuries behind it. So when the royal house weakens, Amarna weakens too, and the return begins, not as an open defeat, but as a quiet rebalancing. You can imagine a river journey in reverse. Boats moving south, carrying sealed jars, wooden chests, and bundles of tablets. The Nile is still the same, wide and calm, with reeds brushing its edges and birds moving over the water like small shadows. But the mood is different. The boat no longer feels like it is arriving at a shining new future. It feels like it is returning to a deeper past. The sun still shines, but it feels older now, less personal, more indifferent. And perhaps that is why the story of Nefertiti becomes even quieter at this stage. Because when a city dissolves, the details of individuals become easier to erase. Officials choose which narratives survive. Priests choose which gods return. Scribes choose which titles remain on record. And in the turning, the queen becomes the easiest mystery to fold into silence. If Nefertiti was still alive, her identity could be protected by not naming it. If she died, her death could be absorbed into political necessity without ceremony. If she ruled, her rule could be hidden behind another name to ensure the transition looks stable. In every version, the result is the same. Her story becomes harder to trace. Amarna's light fades, and the queen, who once stood at the centre of that light, becomes more shadow than person. Now picture the city itself during this slow emptying. The broad avenues remain, but fewer feet walk them. The limestone walls still gleam, but fewer hands maintain them. Workshops that once smelled of pigment and plaster grow still. Tools lie unused. Dust returns, settling softly on thresholds and tables. A city does not collapse in one day. It fades. It becomes quieter. It becomes a place where wind sounds louder than voices, and gradually that fading becomes the first step toward burial. Because when humans leave, the desert begins its work. Sand drifts into corners, weeds grow through cracks. Rain, rare but relentless over time, smooths the sharp edges of construction, and the cliffs continue to watch, unmoved. The cliffs were there before Amarna. They will be there after. If you stand on a terrace and look out in this phase, late in the city's life, you might feel a strange stillness. The kind of stillness that comes when a place realizes it will soon become memory. The sun lowers, the stone glows softly, the shadows stretch across empty courtyards, and you might notice how quickly the human world can change, even when nature remains steady. This is the great turning. A reminder that political truth is not permanent, that religious fashion can shift, that even a city built for the sun can become abandoned under the same sun, and for the quiet mind, the turning is soothing in its inevitability, because it mirrors the rhythm of day becoming night, a gentle decline into quiet, a soft surrender of brightness, a movement toward rest. If Nefertiti is still somewhere in this story, alive, or ruling, hidden, or already gone, She becomes part of that same rhythm, a presence that once blazed at midday, now becoming something dusk-like, subtle, muted, hard to separate from the lengthening shadows. Soon, we will follow the mystery into the place where Egypt keeps its deepest silences, the Valley of the Kings, cool stone corridors beneath the desert, painted walls that still breathe colour in torchlight. And the sensation, so calm it becomes hypnotic, that somewhere behind sealed doors the queen who became a shadow might still be waiting, not lost, only hidden in the quiet dark of eternity. The Valley of the Kings does not announce itself with noise. It reveals itself slowly, the way a secret reveals itself, only to those who move without rushing. Beyond the living world of riverbanks and palm shade, beyond the markets and temples where voices echo against stone, the land becomes drier, quieter, and more severe. Here, the desert feels like a sleeping animal. Its hills are pale and still. Its cliffs rise in rough folds, as if the earth has been frozen mid-breath. The air is thin and clean, carrying the scent of dust warmed by sun, and the faint mineral smell of stone that has held silence for thousands of years. You arrive at dusk. The light is softer now, angled low, turning the valley walls amber and rose. Shadows pool in the creases of the cliffs. The sky above looks vast and emptied of distraction, as if the world is making space for what lies beneath the ground. This is a place built for endings, not dramatic endings, quiet, sealed endings. The Egyptians did not treat death as a sudden stop. They treated it as a corridor, a passage, a journey that needed preparation, guidance, protection. So they built tombs like maps. They painted walls like instructions. They sealed chambers like promises. And because of that, this valley feels less like a cemetery and more like a library carved into rock. A library where the books are walls. A library where the knowledge is painted. A library where each doorway is a boundary between ordinary time and sacred, endless time. You walk slowly along the valley floor. The ground is uneven, scattered with stones and fine sand. In some places, the desert has been disturbed. Paths worn by careful footsteps, small piles of rock moved aside, markings that suggest people have searched here for generations. These search. That is what this moment is. Not the loud rush of treasure hunters, but the quiet, patient curiosity that never fully fades. Because Nefertiti's mystery does not rest comfortably in the open world. It pulls people inward, downward, into hidden places where silence is thick enough to hold a name without speaking it. As the sun slips behind the cliffs, the temperature drops. A coolness spreads across your skin, gentle and immediate. The day's heat evaporates quickly here, leaving behind a calm that feels almost soothing, like the desert is exhaling. A torch is lit. Not a roaring flame, just a steady glow, warm and breathing. The light dances against stone surfaces, returning them alive with movement. Shadows ripple across the cliff face as if something is shifting behind it. You follow a narrow opening, a tomb entrance. The air changes as soon as you step inside. Outside, the desert air is open and dry. Inside, the air is cooler, heavier, more still. It smells faintly of stone dust and ancient dryness, with a trace of something older, resin perhaps, or the memory of oils used long ago in rituals. Your footsteps sound different here, not absorbed by sand, echoing softly against rock. Each step becomes a small signal that you have entered a place meant to remain undisturbed. The corridor slopes downward, not steeply, but enough to guide you away from the living world. The torchlight touches the walls, and for a moment you see the first painted marks. not bright like modern paint, but surprisingly alive. Colours that have survived time because they were protected from wind and sun. Deep blues, ochres, reds, blacks. Figures outlined with clean certainty. This is the eerie comfort of Egyptian tomb art. It looks calm even when it speaks of eternity. The walls show gods and symbols, protective beings, sacred texts arranged in rows like visual music. Stars appear on ceilings, small repeated points that turn rock into a night sky. And the most hypnotic part is the sense that the paint still breathes. Not literally, not as a ghost story, but as a feeling. The images look as if they were made yesterday, preserved in the cool dark, waiting for eyes to return. You move deeper. The corridor turns. The torchlight flickers and changes the mood of every surface. A slight crack in the stone becomes a shadow line. A carved figure seems to shift with the flame's movement. The deeper you go, the more the outside world disappears. No wind, no birds, no distant voices. Only the soft crackle of flame and the sound of your own breath. This is where the search for Nefertiti becomes more than archaeology. It becomes meditation. Because in a place like this, time feels different. 1,000 years feels like a thin veil. A century feels like a blink. The tomb is a machine designed to slow reality down until the mind becomes quiet enough to listen. And when the mind becomes quiet, the question returns. Where is she? Not in the modern sense of coordinates, in the older sense. Where did her story go? Was she buried with honour? Was she hidden deliberately? Was her tomb sealed and disguised to protect it from enemies? Nor was she absorbed into another identity so fully that even death did not restore her original name. You pass a chamber where the ceiling is painted with stars. You stop for a moment and look up. The stars are arranged in patterns, repeated with patient precision. It is not only decoration, it is comfort. A reminder that the night sky continues. A reminder that order exists beyond human life. And in that gentle starry ceiling, you can feel why Egyptian tombs were built this way. The dead were not meant to feel abandoned. They were meant to feel guided, protected, surrounded by a universe that remains stable. You continue. The corridor narrows, then widens again. Your torchlight reveals more scenes, protective deities with calm faces, sacred animals, lines of hieroglyphs marching across the walls like quiet prayers. Each symbol is a piece of meaning, a spell, a map, a promise. The deeper you go, the cooler the air becomes until it feels almost like stepping into shade so deep it has a temperature of its own. In the distance, the corridor seems to end in darkness, but darkness in a tomb is never emptiness. It is a door waiting to be found. You reach a sealed area, stone blocks fitted with deliberate care. Not rough rubble, but a barrier built to last. Dust has settled in the cracks. The floor is smooth with age. This is where the imagination begins to whisper again. Because sealed doors suggest intention. They suggest someone wanted something inside to remain untouched. They suggest a choice made long ago. Keep this hidden. Protect it. Delay discovery. And if Nefertiti's story became dangerous in life, if her name was erased or transformed, then even her burial could have been managed with secrecy. A tomb could be placed near another, a chamber could be concealed behind a wall, an entrance could be disguised under rubble. Egypt was skilled at hidden architecture when it needed to be. Hidden architecture is the physical version of a hidden name. You hold your torch close and let the light slide across the stone barrier. No obvious markings, no loud warning, just a quiet, stubborn boundary. It feels like the valley itself is holding its breath. And then, Slowly, you imagine what might be beyond. Not loud treasure, not glittering greed. A chamber of stillness. A room designed for eternal quiet. Perhaps a soft golden glow where torchlight reflects off carefully placed surfaces. Perhaps lotus motifs painted on walls, repeating the calm theme of her life in Amarna's gardens. Perhaps a sarcophagus sealed with care. Perhaps offerings arranged as if someone believed she would continue to need beauty even in silence. This imagining is not meant to be proven. It is meant to soothe. Because in this quiet space, discovery is not an act of conquest. It is an act of arrival. An arrival into deeper quiet. So you stand there and let the sealed door become symbolic. A symbol of what history did to Nefertiti. Closed off, covered, protected or erased depending on how you see it. And yet the door is still there, which means the possibility is still there, that somewhere beneath the desert, her final place exists, untouched, calm, sealed like a secret kept safe. The torchlight flickers again, and the painted walls behind you seem to glow briefly, alive with colour. The air is cold and still. Your breathing slows naturally, matching the tomb's steady silence. As we drift deeper, we will allow the story to do what history cannot. We will step past the sealed boundary. Not violently, not forcefully, gently. We will discover the chamber that might have been hers, a place of gold and lotus and eternal calm. A final room designed not to frighten you, but to soften you completely into rest. Because some mysteries are not meant to keep you awake. Some mysteries are meant to guide you, quietly, deeper, into sleep. The sealed door does not feel threatening. It feels patient, as if it has been waiting in the dark for so long that waiting has become its natural state, like stone waiting for sunrise, like the desert waiting for rain. Your torchlight flickers against the fitted blocks, and the shadows between the stones look like thin lines drawn with care. The air here is cooler than before, dense with stillness, as if sound itself has been slowed down. You stand close enough to see the dust that has gathered in the smallest crevices. Dust is time made visible. Dust is the soft proof that the world has been quiet here for ages. And when you breathe in, the air tastes faintly mineral, clean and old, like the inside of a mountain. For a moment you do nothing, you simply listen. The soft crackle of flame, the gentle sound of your breath. The deep silence beyond the stones. Then, in this dreamlike journey, where we're not bound by missing records or broken clues, you imagine something simple. A hidden latch, a seam, a place where stone meets stone in a way that suggests it was meant to move, not for intruders, for those who knew, for those who carried the right knowledge. Your hand reaches out in the mind's quiet theatre of sleep, and your fingers trace the cool edge of the masonry. The stone is smooth, worn only by time as darkness. It does not resist you with violence, only with weight. And then, almost like a sigh, the boundary yields. Not loudly, not suddenly, but slowly, as if the tomb itself is cooperating with the calm. A narrow opening appears. At first it is only darkness, a deeper darkness than the corridor behind you, but darkness here does not feel empty. It feels protected, as if the space beyond is holding something gentle. You lift the torch and let the light spill forward. The first thing you see is colour, not bright in an aggressive way, but warm, like the glow inside a shell. Gold leaf perhaps, or polished surfaces that catch the torchlight and reflect it softly, multiplying the flame's warmth across the chamber. The second thing you feel is the air, still cooler but strangely clean, the air of a place sealed carefully, not abandoned. the air of a room built to remain unchanged. You step through the opening with slow reverence. Your footsteps sound small. The chamber is not enormous like a grand hall, but it is not cramped either. It feels balanced, proportioned like a room designed to calm the mind. The ceiling arches gently. The walls are smooth and intentional, and everywhere. The decoration repeats a theme, lotus. Blue lotus blossoms painted in quiet patterns, opening outward like calm stars. Lotus petals arranged along borders, soft curves, gentle symmetry. The same flower you smelled in Amarna's palace gardens appears here again, not as perfume, but as image. It is as if someone wanted to carry her world into eternity. The lotus was not chosen randomly. In Egypt, it is a symbol of renewal, a flower that closes at night and opens at day, a quiet promise that light returns. So to place lotus in a tomb is to say, this is not an ending, this is a passage. In the torchlight you see more details, a ceiling painted with small gold stars against deep blue, like a night sky captured and pinned to stone. The stars are not scattered carelessly, they are arranged with patient repetition, like a soothing pattern for the mind to rest upon. Along one wall, protective figures stand in painted stillness, not frightening guardians, calm guardians. Their faces are composed, their hands raised in gestures of blessing. Their outlines are clean, their colours preserved by the cool, dry air. They look less like threats, and more like watchers placed here to keep the chamber peaceful. Your torchlight moves across the walls slowly, and each section seems to reveal itself like a story being read in silence. Hieroglyphs line the stone like gentle lines of music, rows of symbols that once carried prayers, names and spells designed to protect the soul on its long journey. And among these symbols you imagine a name, not shouted, not carved in huge letters, a name placed carefully, like a secret spoken into a sealed jar, Nefertiti. Or perhaps Neferneferuaten. Or perhaps both, written in a way that satisfies politics and eternity at the same time. Because here, inside the chamber, the need for public narrative fades. Here, only the truth of rest matters. The torchlight glides down to the floor, and you see offerings placed with quiet care. A small table of stone with a shallow bowl. A jar sealed with a lid, perhaps once filled with oil. A necklace laid in a curve, as if it was set down gently rather than discarded. A small mirror, polished bronze, catching the flame and returning a softer light. Mirrors appear again, even here, and they feel meaningful, because mirrors in her world have always symbolized a certain kind of survival, facing danger indirectly, reflecting fear until it becomes manageable. A mirror can also symbolize identity, the way a person can be one thing in public and another in private. A queen in sunlight, a ruler in shadow, a face that survives when the name becomes uncertain. The mirror sits quietly, reflecting nothing dramatic, only torchlight and stillness. And then, at the centre of the chamber, you see it, a sarcophagus, not towering, not aggressive, resting. Its surface is smooth stone with inlaid details that catch the light. The lid sits perfectly, sealed as if it was never meant to be disturbed. The lines of the carving are gentle, curves and borders, lotus motifs repeating again, a calm rhythm drawn into stone. You approach slowly. In this sacred space, we do not rush toward the centre. We let the centre come to us, like a slow tide. The air feels cooler near the sarcophagus, one as if the stone carries a deeper silence. When you stand beside it, you can hear your own breathing more clearly, and that clarity becomes soothing. Because everything here encourages slowness. Everything here encourages the mind to settle. Now imagine the life that led to this chamber. Amarna's bright courtyards, the scent of lotus on warm evenings, the open temples filled with sunlight, the sudden thinning of records, the whispered shift to a hidden name, the careful steering of a kingdom through transition. All of it funnels toward this place, this room where no politics can reach. And the most peaceful part of this imagining is that the mystery stops needing to be solved. In the living world, we search for her because we want certainty. We want a clear ending. We want a name and a location and a date. But in this chamber, certainty is not the goal. Rest is. And rest does not require every question answered. Rest only requires a sense of safety, a sense that the story has arrived somewhere quiet. So you stand in the secret chamber and let the symbols do what they were designed to do. Let the lotus remind you of renewal. Let the stars remind you of order beyond human worry. Let the painted guardians remind you that stillness can be protected. Let the sealed lid remind you that some things are meant to remain undisturbed, not because they are frightening, but because they are sacred. The torchlight wavers once, and the gold tones on the walls glow softly, as if the room itself is breathing. Then, slowly, you lower the torch a little, letting the light soften further. In the dimmer glow, everything becomes gentler. The hieroglyphs turn into quiet patterns rather than messages you must decipher. The lotus blossoms become simple shapes of calm. The stars on the ceiling become a slow, sleepy sky. And you realize something about Nefertiti, the queen who became a shadow. Perhaps she became a shadow in life because she had to, because the bright stage of Amarna was too exposed, too fragile, too full of eyes and judgments. Perhaps the only way to protect power, protect continuity, protect Egypt itself, was to step into a quieter form of authority. And perhaps the final gift of that choice is this chamber, a place where she no longer has to perform, no longer has to be visible, no longer has to be rewritten. Here she is simply at rest, a presence sealed in peace. Now you begin to step backward, not because you fear the chamber, but because you want to leave it undisturbed, as it was meant to be. Your footsteps are slow, and the sound fades quickly into the tomb's deep quiet. You pause once at the opening and look back. The chamber holds its calm. The gold reflections soften. The lotus patterns remain steady. The sarcophagus rests at the centre like a closed eye, and then you let the opening narrow again, as if the stone is returning to its patient waiting. The boundary closes, not as a trap, as a seal, a promise kept. Your torchlight turns back down the corridor. The painted walls lead you out gently, like a pathway of colour guiding you upward. As you walk back toward the surface, the air grows slightly warmer. The sound of your steps becomes lighter, and somewhere ahead, you can sense the desert night waiting. Vast, quiet, star-filled. When you finally emerge, the valley is cool and still. The cliffs are dark silhouettes. The sky is full of stars, clear and countless. And the world feels softer now, because the mystery has taken you somewhere quiet, somewhere safe, not to a loud answer, to a gentle ending, a sealed peace beneath the earth, a queen resting beyond the reach of rumour. And as you stand under the real stars, breathing slowly, you can let your mind loosen its grip on questions. You do not need to solve everything tonight. You only need to drift, like torchlight fading, like footsteps disappearing into sand, like a name becoming a whisper, and then becoming silence. And in that silence, sleep comes easily, deep, steady, and calm, as if the valley itself has taught your thoughts how to rest. Pause. History is a battle between forgetting and remembering. If this story has offered you a sanctuary tonight, you can leave a gentle mark of memory here with a like. And to ensure you can always find your way back to this quiet library, simply subscribe, so the path remains open for you whenever you need to return. But for now, let even those thoughts fade. There's nothing else to do. No past to fix, no future to control, only the safety of this night. May you sleep deeply, may you rest well.